Welcome back to the 2025 Weed Out Coordinator Training. This is the second module. Weed Out Tools to Succeed. Once again, my name is Hallie Minzer, and I'm the Restoration Ecologist with the Milwaukee County Parks Natural Areas Program. We're here to look at the second module for the training for weed out coordinators in order to remove invasive plant species in Milwaukee County parks. With that, let's jump into the second portion, Tools to Succeed. Here's a look at what we expect of our weed out coordinators, and it is a lot. We very much appreciate all that you do to make these invasive species removal events happen. All right, so let's take a look at it blow by blow for what the coordinators are responsible for. It's going to be scheduling the event and doing all of the preparation for those dates, promoting the event to volunteers ahead of time, working with me to designate the target areas. So this often looks like going for a site visit ahead of time. The coordinators are responsible for securing tools and herbicide if necessary for those fall woody invasive species removal dates. And that's going to be getting those tools from the park people more often than not. And then educating volunteers about invasive species at the beginning of the event. That's going to be crucial. Quality control during the event. Applying that herbicide and recording those numbers if necessary, if herbicide is being used. And then finally following up with park staff. All right, so scheduling the events. This is from last year in 2024. I am currently working on putting together the 2025 Weed Out calendar. Thank you to all of you who have submitted these dates already for the 2025 season. I have spring dates from many of you, and I also have fall dates from a handful of you. That's not going to be necessary. If you know those dates, great, go ahead and send them over to me, but it won't be necessary to know those fall dates for this calendar, just the spring ones. I am asking that you, if you haven't given me these dates already for your park, please go ahead and send those over by filling in this link here. You can use this QR code to submit the spring dates you would like to remove invasive species. If you would prefer not to use this form and just use old-fashioned email, that's just fine. You can email me at parkscomsci@milwaukeecounty.gov. So really preparing for that event. Just go ahead and take some time to visualize what this is going to look like, especially if you're newer for this. The more events you do, you're going to get more comfortable, kind of fall into a groove. But thinking about, okay, how many tools am I going to need? How much safety equipment for every volunteer? It's going to be really important to make sure that every volunteer has the tools that they need, and especially the safety equipment to keep everybody safe. Prior to those volunteers showing up at the event, it's often going to be important to let them know the conditions to expect and advising them to wear the appropriate clothing, bringing a water bottle, especially for those hot days. It can be handy to make a map for parking and how to access the location. Some of these sites are going to be really easy. It's going to be the only parking lot on site. Some of them, it's going to be a little bit trickier, and you might be meeting in the woods, for instance. Take note that there are special permissions that are going to be required for children that are not 18. And then one of the most critical steps at the very start of a weed out is taking cuttings, gathering them ahead of time, bringing them to a staging area where you gather all of your volunteers together so that you can show them this is what the invasive species is going to look like, this is how we're going to remove it, and just give them that tutorial before setting them loose. It is going to be necessary that all volunteers sign a volunteer waiver with the county prior to any volunteering that takes place, so doing that ahead of time. You can have them fill out this form online. This is the preferred method, so you can use that link right there. Otherwise, that QR code over there will lead you to that. I do have some individuals who prefer filling out the paper copy. This is something that you can get from me. I will be sending you a link over email to go ahead and access some of these documents. And one of those documents is going to be a group waiver form that you can have everybody fill out at once if you like. There's also individual waiver forms if you wanted to fill out hard copies as well. Once again, the preferred way is this online version, but I understand that that's not always feasible. And I have had some concerns that were brought up to me that coordinators aren't sure if individual volunteers are filling out this online form. So if you feel more comfortable that they fill in the paper one so that you can see them filling it out in front of you and you know that it's done, that is just fine. It's going to then be necessary that you mail those hard copies to me at my office here. So the address right there at the Parks Maintenance Office in Wauwatosa. And try to send those to me as soon as you can. So once again, visualizing what your event's going to look like and how are you going to manage those volunteers? How many volunteers are you going to be leading? Making sure you have enough of those tools and the safety gear, safety glasses. If it's just going to be hand pulling, it could just be gloves and you don't necessarily need any of that other equipment. But potentially in spring, you might be doing some weed wrenching or using that polar bear is another name for it. So making sure that you have access to that. And if you need those supplies, reaching out to the park people with enough notice that they can provide you with those supplies. So really a good thing to think about logistics is, am I going to have a very large group of more than a couple dozen folks, or am I going to have a smaller group of more veteran volunteers who really have their invasive ID skills down and they know what they're doing? If you have that larger group and they're a little bit newer, you're going to want to go in areas that have more invasive species, right? They're going to have fewer high quality native species because you want to be careful that these aren't being trampled by all of that foot traffic and people removing these invasive species. And you want to try to prevent any other negative impacts on those natives, accidentally misidentifying them, for instance, for a newer volunteer. If you have those smaller groups, we recommend that you work in those higher quality areas where impact is going to go even further if there's just a small amount of invasive species there. So really recognizing what's going to work best for your individual volunteer event for your site. A big thing to consider there is how much supervision do you have? How many leaders? How many different coordinators or veterans who can go ahead and supervise is going to be critical. And ideally, the ratio that we like to suggest is having at least one pretty darn experienced individual supervising every 10 inexperienced ones. And this might look like for you, I know a lot of us who are removing these invasive species, we like to go all in ourselves. But if you have more inexperienced folks and a lot of hands, you might not be doing a lot of invasive species removal yourself. You might just be walking around, checking in on everybody, just really doing that quality control. Tools for the spring season are pretty simple. Hand pulling, we're going to recommend gloves a lot of the time, and then that eye protection too. You never know when you're pulling up these invasive species by the roots. You could have little clods of dirt flying everywhere going for the eyes. So those are really going to be the two tools that you need there, are safety equipment. So connecting with those volunteers ahead of time, as I was already mentioning, if your meeting site is a little confusing to find, like Sanctuary Woods at County Grounds Park can be a little bit hard to find the work sites. That's why we have this nice map that was made there by the Weed Out coordinator. Otherwise, if it's just a parking lot, that will be mentioned in the Weed Out calendar, and making a map might not be necessary for you. It's always good ahead of time to communicate with the volunteers, hey, conditions might not be what you think they are. You should be wearing closed-toed shoes, pants down to the ankle. You never know how muddy it's going to be, if there's going to be plants that are gonna scratch you up, like prickly ash, for instance. Potentially there's poison ivy on your site, and you don't want that coming into contact with your volunteer's skin. So letting them know to dress appropriately. Potentially it's the height of tick season. Maybe it's May, and that's when we start seeing ticks come out a little bit more. So just being aware of that, letting your volunteers know, hey, you might want to it's a good idea to do a tick trek after this volunteer event. There might not be bathrooms readily available, so they should come prepared for that. Otherwise, sunscreen and a water bottle, always a good idea to let them know in advance. Event promotion here. Social media can make some things like this a little bit easier nowadays to do this. So I've seen multiple friends groups use Facebook or other platforms to go ahead and advertise their event that way. Otherwise, you could do old-fashioned flyers in libraries with their permission, or coffee shops, that sort of thing, to get the word out. I've seen some people where they have signs that I believe they acquired from the park people that can advertise that weed outs are happening just right within the park. So that's a way to get the word out there. If you are interested in creating kind of an aesthetically pleasing flyer, I recommend that site Canva right there at the bottom right there in blue. Canva you can use for free to go ahead and have, visually appealing graphics in a nice format to throw up a flyer online or in person. Just including all those details there. Please feel free to pause and look at all of that, but it's a nice template to follow. Invasive species education. I can't emphasize the importance of this enough. Really having volunteers be comfortable with identifying the invasive species before they get out there and start controlling it. And then, of course, controlling it in the appropriate way. So we're going into the spring season. We are going to be, garlic mustard is going to be our #1 species that we'll be having volunteers remove on the landscape in spring. So I'll go over some characteristics coming up in a future slide, but making sure that they are comfortable with it, maybe giving them a minimum of 3 things that they can keep an eye out for. So gathering everybody together in a parking lot or a good staging area, telling them the characteristics, having them repeat it back or quiz them on it, that sort of thing, and making sure they feel comfortable. And I always like to have volunteers, especially when they're newer, like, hey, if you have a question when you're out there identifying it, please come ask me that question. You're not bugging me. I want you to feel comfortable IDing this, because it is repetition and it takes practice. Nobody's going to get this right away if they're a first timer. Quality control. Once again, a little bit easier in spring. It gets more complicated going into fall with the woody invasives, but what's really going to be important for these spring species, check in with the volunteers, make sure that they're removing the correct plant and not removing something that they shouldn't be. B, you want to make sure that they're getting enough of the root for garlic mustard and Dame's Rocket and other plants that are being hand pulled. If you leave too much of the root in the ground, if you're not getting enough for all of the root, emphasize to them that, hey, that plant can grow back from those root reserves and it's gonna sprout again. And then making sure, C, that the volunteers are disposing of the plant material in the proper way or staging that plant material correctly. So once again, I'll talk about this coming up, but for garlic mustard, that might look like putting it on a log so that it can't reroot. Later in the season, you might be bagging it up so that the seeds don't get in contact with the soil and make future plants. And then submitting all of this information, I am doing my best to kind of streamline the process. Where we are at right now, currently in 2025, is filling out these Google Forms that I've created. This may change in the future. I'm trying to keep things as consistent as possible because I know how it is to be submitting all kinds of different forms to different places and different people. So I am working behind the scenes with folks to try to streamline this even more for you and come up with the best way possible. But right now we are at this Google Form submission here. So filling this out online is how I prefer this. If possible, you can scan that QR code to go to the 2025 event submissions here. But if you can't do that, please feel free to email those numbers over to me, or if you want to keep this in a spreadsheet, that's just fine as well, and send that over by the end of the calendar year at the latest. I think that the digital way can be very convenient because I recommend that Weed Out coordinators submit this at the end of the event for each event. It's just a nice way to get it done. The numbers are fresh in your head. You don't have to backtrack and try to estimate anything if you're doing all of this at the end of the year. I found that that works pretty nice. I hope that you all would agree as well for this. So filling out this form at the end of the event is my recommended way of doing this. Here is what that looked like for last year. This form is going to look the same this year, except for 2025 will be the date. So feel free to pause and take a look at those metrics there. I'll just say that some of this stuff, certainly for spring weedouts, is not going to apply because you are not going to be using herbicide in the spring. Here is the old form. If you would prefer to fill out this copy, this is for, so this is going to apply for the fall weed out events, but I just wanted to include it in this presentation. You can go ahead and fill out the old form if you like, or just email this over to me. Once again, spring is not the time of year to be using herbicide for cut stump because it's just not effective. But if anybody is interested in obtaining their pesticide applicator certification, I have created this little quick guide for you to kind of understand what this process is. I put it in the spring presentation because it can take a little bit of time to go through the manual and to study it and to learn it and to take that test and then get certified. So if this is something that you know, hey, at my park, I want to be removing buckthorn this upcoming fall, this is something you should start thinking about because it's going to be necessary for at least one individual of your friends group to have this 6.0 pesticide applicator certification in order to use the herbicide to do the cut stump treatment. More of that will come in the fall training to go into more details with this. And with that, that's the end of this second module for the Weed Out Coordinator training. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope to see you for the next video.